What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Brown Girl Green. I'm your host, Christy Drutman, where I interview environmental leaders and advocates about the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as creative solutions to the climate crisis. I am so excited to be filming another IRL podcast straight from my living room here on the East Coast, and we have an incredible guest joining us today from the team at Project Drawdown.
Yes.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure thing. My name is Matt Scott. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Director of Storytelling and Engagement at Project Drawdown, and I'm really focused on passing the mic to voices that often go unheard through storytelling and engagement in my work. So I think we'll get into it, but I'm the founding director of our Drawdown Stories program and just excited to be here with you because I just feel like there's a lot of synergy with what we do. Like sometimes when I see the work you're doing, I'm just thinking like, oh, I could rest because Christy's got it covered. So I'm a fan. Yeah.
No, and I'm so grateful that, like, first of all, your title and your role is so cool.
I'm so thankful for it.
Yeah.
I can't thank Project Drawdown enough for giving me the space to like do everything I do because so much of it is just like from here and from in here, and they let me go and lead. But I love it. I love storytelling. I love engagement. It's such a deep part of me, and we'll get into it, right?
So for people who don't know, what is Project Drawdown and what is Drawdown Stories?
Yeah, so Project Drawdown is a global nonprofit climate solutions resource, and what I like to say is that Project Drawdown overall focuses on three key things. The science of climate solutions, so people might know the Drawdown book, which was a New York Times bestseller, sold nearly 500,000 copies. But we also focus not just on updating the science, but on the stakeholders. So like business leaders, investors, and philanthropists. And then there are the stories, which is where I come in. And it's really about shifting the narrative when it comes to climate change, because we know that not only, unfortunately, so often the communities most vulnerable to the impacts of climate are Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color, underrepresented communities, but also that we're also often the least represented in the stories and the climate narratives. And so Drawdown Stories focuses on centering our voices really explicitly, but then also helping people find their role when it comes to climate change and climate solutions, because so often I think everyday people from all sorts of backgrounds feel like they don't have a role, or if they're not scientists, they don't belong. There's a lot there. I feel like I say that phrase a lot. Like, there's a lot there, but there is a lot there. And I really focus on like humanizing and making it accessible and helping everyone see that they have a role when it comes to this stuff.
Wow. I don't know how our paths in life have not crossed until now, honestly, because I'm like, you are speaking my language.
I think it's the thing where we're both running in not even different directions, but same directions or similar directions, and you're just moving so fast that it doesn't, the crossing doesn't happen as much. But that's one of the things that we need more of, the community and collaboration and togetherness. But we are here.
I know, we made it though. You're literally on my couch.
The synergy is here, by the way.
Our color coordination, we got the yellow,
the yellow,
we got
the
the black. Oh my gosh.
I love this.
Slay. No, I love it. And I love the concept of making these things accessible for everyday people, especially, young people of color. I think that is how we move the needle, right? Because we can talk about climate solutions all day. And, I love Project Drawdown for all the science and the information they put out. Right. But in terms of implementation and actually making those solutions possible, you have to be able to do accessible storytelling, right?
100%. And I'll say that I always put this out there because people think, again, they need to be comfortable with the science. They need to be great in science. I struggled so much in science class growing up. There may or may not have been science class or two I've had to retake because of how much I struggled, because my brain doesn't work like that at times. And I felt like I was the problem. It further distanced me from the climate space. And it wasn't until I heard about climate justice and saw people who weren't scientists doing this work, and then people who looked like me, people who are Black, who are queer, just people of color in this space, young people doing this work, that I felt like I belonged. And so, it's a journey, but I think what's so cool is that both of us each day could help more and more people feel belonging, which is traditionally like really hard to fill in this space, but we need all of us in order to solve this problem, right?
Right. And at the core of, mobilization and climate solutions is being able to create that culture shift. And in order to create that culture shift, we have to meet people where they're at.
100%.
Yeah.
I can't agree more, but like that's the piece that I think we forget. Like we know that, and you focus on that so much.
Yeah.
I do too. But obviously, it's easier said than done.
And it's still an echo chamber.
It's an echo chamber.
Yeah, it really is.
But even within that echo chamber, there are conversations we need to have about all the things that we each center in our work of justice, inclusion, equity, diversity, all of that. And so there's still work we need to do in the echo chamber, and then we have to get other people into the conversation so it's less of an echo chamber. So there's a lot of work to do, but I was going to say for me, like, there's no stopping me doing it because it's so personal, and I know the same for you too, right?
And I'm curious, like, with Drawdown Stories, like, with your approach of, like, finding a really amazing story that hits on these intersections, like, how do you know that, like, that's the story? Like, you're like, oh, yeah, like, this is, wow, this nails it. This, like, is going to meet people where they're at, really touch them, like, or if you have an example.
That's really funny because the reality is, and I think about this a lot, that like I do a pre-interview with people where I don't even ask them that much about them, to be honest. They're just behind the scenes. There's a questionnaire that we have people fill out that I look at a little bit just to get context on like who people are, what their background is, what they've studied, what their interests and hobbies are. That's one question I'll ask. What their familiarity is with climate change, because just as context, like I'm the creator and host of Drawdown's Neighborhood, which is a climate solution short documentary series. Passing the mic to the voices that often go unheard. I'll say that phrase a million times in this conversation. Right. But like the number one thing about that is that, we get recommendations for organizations to feature, we find people to feature, and don't necessarily know that the story is the perfect story or that like this story will be incredibly entertaining or interesting. And I think that's the fascinating part that people don't really see with the work that I do with Drawdown's Neighborhood. And also with another initiative that we just launched called the Global Solutions Diary. We're just finding people, and I feel like everyone has an interesting story to share, even though we don't feel like it oftentimes. I actually recently like posted this little like cell phone video on LinkedIn where I was talking about that and mention the fact that people don't like feel like they have a story to tell or don't think they have an interesting story, and yet what I found is like everyone has something that's interesting and compelling and that they get excited about and that other people could find really compelling. So that's kind of what I found, rather than let's go find these stories that are really compelling and resonant, that like everyone has these compelling stories, and having the diversity of stories just sort of means that when I'm sitting there across from someone, kind of like we are now, like I'm just surprised oftentimes about all of the cool things about them. And then I want to translate that to people at home so that whether it's the work that they do and the climate relevant stuff, or whether it's just their hobbies, like one of our interviewees, Clara Katango from Pittsburgh, is amazing. She works in an organization, Tree Pittsburgh. She was on the panel with me at the Nest Summit. As you know, she's a singer. Didn't know that when reaching out to Tree Pittsburgh, and they recommended that we interview her. And she just started singing in the middle of our interview. And I was just like losing it. And I'm also in the interview like trying to snap on the beat because I'm like, this is recorded. Like this is perfect. But no, it's you find all of these incredible people. And I think maybe like the life lesson I would say beyond climate is the more that we just like you do, like I do, the more that we sit down and have conversations with people and listen to them and value them and like give them a comfortable space to share their story, the more that you find these like really quirky or fun things that they might not feel comfortable sharing anywhere else, right?
Because ultimately, like when we're talking about climate solutions and trying to create these interventions, we have to understand that it's being driven by people, right? So 100%. you're being able to do things that is like rehumanize some of these things that feel really technical or very meta or like very systemic in some ways, and then we have to understand that like there's people behind those different, systems or interventions.
Exactly. Like scientists are people, corporate employees are people, investors are people. And I find myself every day trying to remind people of that, that like, you can connect with people on a human level regardless of what their job is, but sometimes we just think about someone's job as the identifier. I live in Washington, D.C., where people ask the question, what do you do? As in, what's your job? But like, there's so much more to people than just their job.
Well, I want to dive a little deeper into that.
Yeah,
because I'm just curious, like, you know, we live in a time where like there is a lot of cancel culture, and there's a lot of like, in the back of your head, if you're gonna be friends with someone or date someone or like even be in like the same breathing air, in a way you have to like know that they check certain boxes on their values, what they believe, where they stand. But again, that could lead you into like an interesting territory where like, of course, there's definitely like non-negotiables, but then there's certain issue areas or certain things, even when it comes to climate solutions, where people maybe have more of a gray area. For instance, maybe you do talk to like more corporate people, right? But then you probably talk to some like grassroots activists.
100%.
And those people might not ever talk to each other, right?
Right.
And there is an interesting thing in the environmental space, at least that I've experienced, where it's like, if you do go into certain spaces where you're with people that are like full corporate or full government, whatever, people will be like, those are like the sellouts.
Yeah.
But those are the people that are continuing to perpetuate the status quo. Those are the people like upholding this like broken system, right? And then those people view the activists as like, oh, those are the people that are like disrupting things, not letting people like listen to them, blah, 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 which of course I'm more on the activist side, so I'm like, whatever. But again, like all of those voices though, like those people still hold power, those people still hold a space in doing these interventions. And so I want to know, in your perspective, like, how have you held space for all those different people?
I love this conversation so much.
Because I ask myself the same question every day, so I'm just curious how you think
what comes to mind for me is that we need people who could serve as bridges, right? I think of myself as a bridge. Like, I'm not an expert in a ton of different fields, right? Especially, I'm not an expert in the fields that I interview people about, which is the beauty of it, because they teach me so much.
Right.
But something I found, and I think of actually the Drawdown's Neighborhood Tri-State series, which we did, which featured people from Newark, New Jersey, which is 8 miles away from where I grew up in West Orange, New Jersey, people from New Haven, Connecticut, people from the Bronx, New York. And at this live screening event, which we did at Climate Week, which is a time when you get all of these different people in one place, we had some of the folks who are, you know, on the ground doing their jobs. We had folks who are more activists. We had folks who are journalists, corporate professionals, investors, like this mix of people. And something I found actually listening to one of our interviewees, Christian Rodriguez is their name. Christian works at the Down Bottom Farms for the Newark Ironbound Corporation. And so, like, Christian said, Matt, like, thank you so much for giving us this space. I trust you to do this. I trust Project Drawdown to do this. And I feel like I aim to serve as a bridge to help people connect, like to help the investors and philanthropists feel comfortable, because I have experience being in those spaces with them. The same with the corporate professionals, the same with the activists. And actually, one of the things that we're doing, which is really interesting, is actually hosting not just these screenings, because we've done tons of screenings for the series, but like actually hosting convenings where we're bringing together all these people to talk about how we together can like pass the mic and how we together could move forward. So there obviously are tensions there, but my approach is one that starts with centering the humans, one that starts with recognizing that there is a lot of weight and emotion and trauma that we all carry personally and when it comes to climate and otherwise, but like making space for people to be people and have really like human conversations where we could see each other as humans first and then get into like, what are the values we share, where are their differences, and then where could we bridge the gaps to come together for greater impact. So it's funny because that might sound like kind of fluffy. At least to me it did when I heard it. But the reality is there are lots of people who are doing that. Speaking of the folks in Newark, I'll mention Natalie Augusta Filion, who's an activist, but she worked in the Newark government as the sustainability officer. She works in the New Jersey program in that department. And so she's an example of someone who's bridging those gaps. Like, we need bridges. We need bridges in this world.
I appreciate.
Like, I think that's what solves those issues that you're talking about. But the tensions are so real. We need to like have spaces where we could listen to each other. be vulnerable, be wrong, all that stuff. I could go on forever, right?
Right, and I love that you're bringing that up because I also view my role very much as a bridge builder, and some people may not like bridge builder.
I mean, but if they like you, and
But
that's
they like me,
that's the
right?
thing. Like, if people will, this is the thing that I've found is that when I form relationships, and this is like advice I'd give to anyone listening.
Yeah.
Like, if you form those relationships, you kind of like metaphorically, you're like grabbing people's hands and you're walking with them through something, and it might not feel comfortable. But like that trust that they have for you in that relationship will at least get them to try.
Right.
And not hate you or yell at you at the end of it because they know where you're coming from.
Right.
And that's where I start from. Like, I find, and maybe this is just me, but like 99%, if not 100% of the meetings, calls, whatever I have with people, there's just laughter, there's joy, there's humanity. And I think that goes a long way to forming those bonds that make it so it's possible to connect. So like you're someone who has that ability to connect with people, but it can be scary and we don't always try. Like, I'll tell you, the convening that we're putting together next month in the Bay Area, it's scary. You're bringing all these people together. How are they going to interface? But then I think of the individuals there who have so much like love and admiration for not just the work and Project Drawdown, but like for me. And I have to remember that those people are going to help enrich the space and the experience and make it one where we actually can connect and make progress together and collaborate and all of that impactful stuff, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think bridge builders just go a little underappreciated in certain ways because I think, like I was saying before, at least in my perspective, I think being a bridge builder can be viewed as this like, oh, you're not taking a stance. You're like bringing everyone to the table, but should all those people be to the table? What are your non-negotiables? What are your values? Like people really like, at least for me as like a public facing person online, you know, I've had to figure out like, where do I draw my lines on like who am I willing to have a conversation with or not, or who are the types of brands or companies I'm willing to work with or not, right? And all of that creates this really interesting conversation that like I've had to figure out on like what, like where do I measure who, and what it comes down to in my view on it is transparency, communication, and follow through.
100%.
So for me, 100%. I think if an organization or a company or a person is willing to be like, hey, we're not perfect, or hey, this is what we're doing, or hey, like I'm down to have a conversation and to have that accountability, bring in especially young people as like experts to consult and talk about those processes, then okay, you're worth a conversation. But if you're an organization or a company that's like, we're just like, you know, doing kind of sketchy stuff, and then we're opening up like, you know, this greenwash program, you can obviously tell it's greenwash, and you're not willing to have follow-up conversations, I think that I guess is my measurement of where I draw the line.
I'm with you. So, and that's the thing, not everyone should be in the room, because some people do create spaces that aren't safe and aren't conducive to conversation and actually work against that. So, you know, like what you said is so real. And yet, even with the people who are on that other side who can be part of productive conversations, there are so many of us who are not bridged together.
That's true.
But I'm with you. Not only are bridge builders often undervalued, but like bridges are undervalued, which the part I like to think of myself as a realistic optimist, and I'm someone who sees like all this opportunity within the climate world to, and in general in our world, to bridge spaces and bridge people who like have similar goals and missions, or at least think they want the same thing. Like, we can bring people together, but...
And I think there's a lot more of that than difference.
Exactly.
And I think people don't realize that. I think there's a lot more that we have in common than we do have apart.
And we often start with our differences or focus on them. Like I've definitely, it's maybe like a masochistic thing to do to myself, but I will like read through like comments on certain things when I'm like, ooh, I know people are going to be arguing, just to like see what people are saying.
I do the same thing.
It's not right. It's not right. And like sometimes I'll hop into it too, because, you know, you get the feeling when you have to respond to a thing.
Right.
People don't go with, oh, I agree with what you just said. I agree with this point and that point and that point. This is the part where I disagree. It's just, let's ignore the agreement and go for the disagreement. And that's just not productive. But that's also why it can be more difficult online to have these productive, generative actions, and why like being in front of each other as physical humans like results in that, right?
What's been like the feedback on like Drawdown Stories or like these screenings? Like, how do people come out of it? Like, do you feel like it's making that human connection that you're talking about?
Yes, and the big piece is like I just want more and more of that growth to reach more and more people, because that's the part that I've been maybe not amazed by, but like I've always known in my approach as a storyteller and even just as a person, like with my own identities, not just like as a Black queer person, but like so many different things that shape me and my experiences, I have found connect with different people, and they allow for a space where people could find the commonalities at the different screenings we do, which we've done them in Atlanta, in the Twin Cities, in New Orleans, in the tri-state area, coming up in the Bay Area, like, and then I do tons of talks and workshops, right, where people also connect. We have moments where people are able to turn to someone they don't know and like have a conversation and connect. And sometimes like what's so beautiful is like some people will be in tears with how moving the experience is. They'll be surprised, like, oh my gosh, I thought that this was going to be just about climate, not about identity, not about people's power and what they could do. You know, it's so interesting because I've seen like how effective it is, and I just want to like be able to translate that to the platforms who are the more traditional stakeholders who don't value all of those things. So, but there's tons of value there, which is why the work exists. And it's been like almost 4 years that I've been at Project Drawdown creating and leading this work. And I think that the work and how it's resonated just speaks to how it's needed, which I hear from people as the feedback. And then the big question is like, how do we scale that and make sure that we're reaching all the people with it? And how do we, and part of that's collaborations, right? Like finding ways to collaborate with like folks like you, finding ways to even just like share our platforms and amplify each other. Like that goes such a long way. But I love that the feedback has been positive, and it is interesting because like you said or like we've said with social media, there are times where it just feels like it's just contentious and butting heads, but I also find that all of the meaningful interactions for me around our work, or most of them, are like not on social media, which I think is maybe why, you know, maybe that's where the feedback I've gotten comes from. But also the ones on social media have been like positive. I just always want more though, is the thing, right?
I think, you know, you're bringing up an interesting point that like climate storytelling today has a huge opportunity to build new community spaces, right? By bridging those gaps and bridging people that traditionally wouldn't be together, like you're creating a new third space for like a new type of interaction, which sounds like, you know, the forum you're doing in the Bay Area and these other things. It's like spaces that may have never existed before. Not
in the way that you know that we're doing them, because even in my career, like I you know, previously in my role before Drawdown for about 5 years, I worked at this organization called Second Muse. It's a funny name, long. I don't even mention the story of how the name came up, but I used to always do that. But we worked with folks like the Australian government, with NASA, with the White House, the Obama White House, and then it got sketchy. And then there was like the USAID program, like Nike, all these others, and many of them would host these like forums, bring people together, and I was there as the storyteller at the time, doing mostly social media storytelling, like short video clips with my phone. But I found so often that I was like the only young person, or the youngest person, the only Black person there, the only openly queer person who was there, like did not see the diversity there at all. And it's interesting because I still see a lot of people in this year, 2024, hosting convenings and events where I'm like, how is that all white people? How is that even mostly white people? How's that even half white people in this space? Like how, and you know, like I know that like white people have a lot to contribute, are in many of the roles that matter.
Hey, this is the Brown Program podcast, really.
But it's like, why is this so hard?
It is.
Why is it so hard to like just have representation? And even just I hear it in my voice, and even see it in your face, like,
hey,
why are we doing this to us? We just want to show up and make a difference. Like, invite us to the spaces.
Yeah, as I've kind of gone further in this journey, you know, when I first started this show, it was very much about like wanting to obviously uplift the voices of Black and brown folks.
Yeah.
And for me to just feel like I had a space to have people actually hear me, right?
Yeah.
And now as I've gotten older, you know, as important as my identity has played a role, I'm kind of like, I just also want to be just viewed as an expert.
Yes, and I think that that's one thing that I find myself struggling with, because it's this weird balance. Like, you know, there are moments where I think of Climate Week, the Nest panel, which is where you saw me on stage and everything. And for me, and I really wanted to mention this coming to this, like, that Climate Week, which was my first Climate Week, even though I'd been in similar settings, was so emotionally difficult as like someone who's looking out onto these crowds where there's not like the diversity to the levels where there should be, or these spaces where it's not as inclusive as it should be. That doesn't mean, I mean, I'm sure I'll be back and continuing to work to transform those spaces. But, you know, at times, like, we lean into our identities and being, you know, our identities. But the reality is, like, that's not, we shouldn't be pigeonholed as that or tokenized as that. And part of what I think that we all kind of struggle with as folks from underrepresented groups in this space, in any space, is people seeing us as more than that. Because I know people see the inclusion aspects of my work, but I have all this expertise in storytelling in general. I have all this expertise in engagement. I have this expertise when it comes to social entrepreneurship. I have this expertise when it comes to like systems thinking and human-centered design and complex problem solving and convening people, and like we could keep going on. Not like we're more than just some people say like the diversity initiative, right? But it's like getting people to see that and see us fully. Like, that's the reason I do the work I do. And so it is funny because like with what you do and with what I do, I keep seeing the parallels here.
I know,
but like it's cool because like the like we are also still advocating and like fighting for ourselves
to even be like legit and validated in this space,
while also fighting for the community. But I think what's cool is that like we aren't just like trying to solve problems that like other people face. Like, we are facing it, so we know it, we feel it. Like, we're in the community. We're not representing everyone's experiences, but we're that much closer, which I think is a superpower, right?
Yeah, and in your opinion, like, I mean, you've talked about it a lot already about passing the mic, but like, why, in your own words, why do you think it's important that we have more Black, Indigenous, and people of color like environmental storytellers today?
Well, environmental storytellers, environmentalists, like just people in this space. We have so many superpowers and so much perspective that's often overlooked. But just to focus on the storytellers in particular, I'm so amazed. 55 interviews in, like, it'll be 55 episodes by the end of this year. 48 are published for Drawdown's Neighborhood. And the things that people share and feel comfortable sharing, it's like astounding. And it's also interesting because they'll say, I never have shared my story. I never thought I'd feel comfortable sharing this. Because you are a queer Black man, I feel comfortable sharing this with you because of your approach and a more inclusive. I've also realized it's a very trauma-informed approach, just based on like my advocacy background in different spaces. Like, that helps people show up. And so when we have more storytellers from more diverse communities, it allows more stories to be told. I've been interviewed at times, I'm sure you have, by people who don't represent our identities. And there are certain things like I wouldn't say to someone who, they're just hesitations that you have sometimes when like sitting across from someone that is not of your identities at all versus someone who is and who gets it. Like, there's a lot there. So I don't know. That's what's important to me, is that that diverse representation of storytellers leads to more diverse stories. And really, the purpose of diverse stories is it unveils all these superpowers and solutions and resources we have in this fight against the climate crisis, which we need. We need all of those superpowers. But so often they sort of like, they live hidden because people aren't given the space to share.
What would your advice be to like a young Black, Indigenous, or person of color who might be listening to this, who like, or I guess just anyone who's listening to this, but particularly those folks who like want to be a storyteller, want to maybe have a platform or share stories, and don't know where to get started? What are your tips for them?
Number one, I would say don't wait for someone else to give you permission. Like I did have a career or like a full-time job as a storyteller, but that wasn't me doing full-length interviews. I actually started interviewing people back in 2017, so like 7 years ago. And there's like a much longer story behind it, but it was after my dad passed away. My dad, who had this incredible story, like my best friend in the world at the time. And my dad was like someone who was like humble and quiet and like, but also someone who survived as a black man in the civil rights era in Prince Edward County, Virginia. I shared this story at Climate Week multiple times where they closed the schools and where they told him, oh, you know, because he not only faced racism, but colorism as a darker skinned black man. And people would just kind of say to him, like, you're not going to amount to anything, which he said, I'll show you. And he did. He moved away from home, graduated from high school, graduated from an HBCU, Howard, served as a captain in the military, graduated from Harvard Business School, started his own family, had an epic career, started his own business, like did all these things while making a positive impact. And I share that because he just kind of went out there and did it. And his story was what prompted me to go out there and just tell stories that aren't told. Because when he passed, I realized, why isn't this epic story being told? This was an incredible hero, and just because he's not, insert, famous voice or person here, like, doesn't mean his story shouldn't be told. And so that's what prompted me to do that. And I just started interviewing people over Zoom with my laptop, and that evolved over the years because I stuck with it. To like making a film, which I mostly filmed on like cell phones and editing that together. And then I finally got resources behind my work and was able to do it. So I would say to just start doing it rather than waiting for someone to hire you to do it. Because ultimately what you just start doing will lead to people like funding it and resourcing it and supporting it. That's like my number one piece of advice. But I'd also say, especially for the BIPOC folks, rest is important. I see that you have a bottle that says like rest is radical on it over there. And like rest is so important. Rest is critical. Community is critical. Realize you don't have to do it alone. Realize that you need to take care of yourself, because if you're not, putting your life vest on first or your oxygen mask on first, you can't put anyone else's on, right?
Right.
Yeah.
No, I love that. I think especially in doing creative work and being able to, be in community with people and trying to hold space for so many different emotions and energies and stories, I think it is important for people who want to do that creative work to understand that there needs to be a balance. And like you said, like, even the work online, as great as it is, like, you also have to have like support in real life.
100%. Yeah. And just to remember that like online, we know this, like our generation knows this, that's real.
It is real.
But also there are a lot of aspects of it that are just not fully representative of like who humans are and what life is.
Right.
So I find like meditation even being helpful. It's like step back and just ground myself in who I am and where I am, and the fact that like I'm in a safe place and like things are going well for me, even if the world like might literally be on fire or there might be wars in the world and genocide and all these things. Like, that's real, but like, it's good to ground ourselves and like even just have the gratitude for where we are and be like, okay, I could breathe. Okay, I'm fine. My feet are grounded. Like, I could do this. And I think that that's really important for us. But yeah, like, I'd also say don't be afraid to reach out. Like, I'm an easy person to find on all of the places online and otherwise, but like, don't hesitate to reach out, because you never know if someone will respond or be in touch with you. And it never hurts to try. There's a lot there. I've said this a million times, but there's a lot there counter. But like, that's the reality. Like, this could be a 5-hour conversation.
No, there is. And I think when we're talking about climate hope and positivity, I think we're entering a new paradigm where the ways in which we connect with each other, we have so many ways to do that, but yet we are living in what is called like a loneliness epidemic, which is crazy, right? And so stories now more than ever are so important for people to not feel alone. And not only those stories, but the communities that can be created out of those stories, like you're saying. And I really love that your work bridges on that. It's not just about sharing, it's about, okay, what do we do with that story after it's told? And so something I always like to talk about on Brown Girl Green is that stories have material impacts, right?
100%.
You know, our whole country and world and everything is built on stories.
Exactly.
And so I think for anyone listening, you know, storytelling and the stories you're telling about not only yourself and how you relate to the work, but also what is happening with the climate crisis and what opportunities there are to do something about it. Those are all stories, right? And whoever tells those stories is ultimately going to influence, you know, the actual material outcomes, whether that's policy, funding, right?
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering, like,
please,
you know, from your position as someone who is a bridge and is seeing that the impact of stories, like, yeah, maybe you could speak on that a little bit more. Like, why do you, like, how do you think stories, especially in climate, that are more positive and forward-looking could ultimately shape the future of our world?
You can't be what you can't see. That's like the bottom line. Like, if we keep only talking about the crisis, there are so many kids who don't know that solutions are a part of the climate crisis or that any positive change is possible. There are so many teachers who don't realize that, so they're not teaching their students that. There are so many, just like so many people going day to day who don't realize that we could do something about climate, and so they're suffering from the doom and the gloom and the distance from the problem. And I often reference this research from psychologist and economist Per Espen-Stoknes about how, like, the current ways we communicate about climate with climate news and just the statistics and data and science leads to a sense of distance, a sense of doom, a sense of cognitive dissonance, denial, and then conflicts with identity. But he also talks about how stories are more brain-friendly and propel action, especially when it's stories that are simple and not overwhelming, stories that signal progress when it comes to emissions, but also show all the ways that we're supporting the things we care about, like day in and day out, more than just emissions numbers. So like things like health, jobs, equity, safety, security, joy, all those things are benefited by solutions and the ways that we work, but we don't talk about them a lot. And then stories that are social and feature characters we relate to are important. And so for me, telling stories, which is, like you pointed out, often overlooked and underrated, like, we need the science. Yes, we need the science. We also need the stories. We also need the different stakeholders, diverse stakeholders in the room. Like, we need all of it. This is not a one tool problem to solve, right? And so, like, to your point about people and their stories, like, not only are there stories to listen to, which is actually really critical because so often from underrepresented communities and voices, our stories and voices aren't listened to. Like, I'm sure there are people who see, like, pass the mic to voices that often go unheard, or underrepresented voices and tune out, or brown girl green and tune out. But the reality is, yes, listen to those. Also, like, especially if you're from an underrepresented community, share your story. And that's something that I'm thankful that, like, just through being visible and through helping others be visible in this work, like, it does help and lead to more people feeling like their story matters, knowing their story matters, and sharing that, which is what we need in order to solve this climate crisis. I believe it's that we need people, like, fully showing up, fully using their superpowers, so to speak, and, like, making the biggest impact they can make, because we need it. We need it. We need to do it quickly, safely, and equitably. But stories and people showing up fully is a huge part of that.
Yeah. Amazing. Last question is, you know, is there a story that you could pull out of Drawdown Stories? I know there's a million, but just, like, to summarize for us, like, one where it was like, wow, this really, like, made you have a lot of hope for the future.
My gosh, you know, there are so many, and it always hurts me because people ask, do you have favorites? I'm like, no, I don't. Stop. Everyone's amazing. But, you know, one story that comes to mind for me right now is the story of someone named Willie Jones III. He lives in New Orleans, works with an organization called Groundwork New Orleans, and just does green infrastructure work, and he survived Hurricane Katrina, as like most of the interviewees that I interviewed there did. And the thing with Willie is we're talking, and there's so many different barriers that he faced as a kid in New Orleans, between just like witnessing issues with drugs and gun violence, and like the education system not being there for him, and like other systemic systems really failing him in many ways. And yet everything we spoke through, he came back to this point that the future is ours to shape. Like, everything I've been through, that was the past. The past is the past, but the future is ours to choose. And that really inspired me, because so often I think it's easy for us to feel defeated by the past and what's happened to us. But the beauty is, like, that next step we take, like the next breath we take. I feel like I'm about to do a song. I'm not trying to do that. But like, it's ours to choose, right? And I think that that's the beauty, is like, we have the choice to build the future, which sounds big, but the reality is, like, literally, if you're listening, like, or if you're watching, like, take a moment to think, like, what's something you could do today that is making your community better? What's something you could do tomorrow even, or this weekend if you're tied up already? Like, there's always something we can do, which is the part that I love, and I'm really inspired by that.
Amazing. Well, I love your energy, and your enthusiasm is definitely like...
You're bringing it, you're like pulling it out. It's here. Yes.
No, it's been such a delight to just have you on the show today. And just to wrap us up here, where can people reach you in your joyous, jubilant, amazing self?
My gosh. You can find me on all platforms at Matt Scott GW. And I'm on like LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Matt Scott GW. Don't ask me why I know the LinkedIn link. I love LinkedIn. It's so fascinating to me.
I'm a LinkedIn girly.
It's really interesting. Of course you are. The jobs and all the things, but I really love it there, especially because like I like to post the videos, and just it really cuts through the noise in a way where people aren't like superhuman on LinkedIn, and I love the challenge of doing that. But I'm on all the other platforms. I check them. I don't post all that much on things, but I'm there. I can be reached. And then you could find me, listeners, if you want to, you could email me, matt.scott@drawdown.org. And you could find my work at drawdown.org/stories. That's the program I lead. Drawdown.org/NABE is the docuseries. Drawdown.org/diary is where you can submit your own story using your phone or webcam. And Drawdown.org is where you could find Project Drawdown and all of the many resources, including climate solutions, resources for employees and employee action, all that stuff. So I think those are my plugs. I feel like I should give out my like address and phone. I'll stop short of that. I'll stop short. But this is good. Everyone can find me otherwise.
Right. They can find you.
Happy to end on a scary note. But no, I'm like, please reach out. And I love to hear from people.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining on Brown Girl Green today.
Thank you.
You've been such a light in a world of a lot of darkness right now, and I'm so grateful to be with a fellow storyteller of color who's also carving out new pathways and building the blueprint as we speak.
Yeah, and thank you for like everything that you're doing, because it is changing the world. I will say, like, so often, I know I'd like have to definitely run,
right.
But so often, like, I look and I'm like, oh my gosh, how are all these people doing this amazing work? But like, it's so cool to just be here with you and having this conversation. I'm like, Christy and I, like, we breathe the same air. Like, we could do this together. And I'm just thankful that, like, you exist and you inspire me.
I'm so grateful you exist.
Yeah.
Oh my God, give a hug. Well, that was another episode of Brown Girl Green, where I interview environmental leaders and advocates about the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as creative solutions to the climate crisis. Catch this episode and many others at the Brown Girl Green podcast, wherever you get your shows. Subscribe to the Brown Girl Green YouTube channel and follow the Brown Girl Green podcast Instagram. Catch you on the next episode. Bye!